Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, 2 Israeli hostages released. The IDF strikes Hezbollah infrastructure in Lebanon, and troops prepare for a ground war in Gaza. More Hamas atrocities revealed to journalists, and former Israeli ambassador Michael Oren gives his perspective on Israel's war on terror, and the world braces for the economic effects. Plus, help for the displaced and traumatized. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Hamas released 2 more Israeli hostages Monday evening, and Israel released body cam footage of the October 7th massacre as the Israel-Hamas war continues for the 18th day on Tuesday. Here's a look at this unfolding situation. Hamas posted video of members taking care of Yocheved Lifshitz, 85, and Nurit Cooper, 79, before handing them over to the Red Cross in Egypt, which took them to Israel.
These people aren't humanitarians, they're bloodthirsty killers. And if they are releasing people, it's because they're being compelled to do so by the pressure we're placing upon them. And as that pressure increases, I believe, you'll get more people out.
The women were kidnapped on October 7th from kibbutz near Oz, bringing the total number of released hostages to 4. Their husbands are still in captivity.
We really hope that this is the beginning of the release for the rest of the hostages, which is very important. And more important than their release, we hope this will continue.
At least 220 Israelis are still being held hostage by Hamas, including 30 children. One of them, Ohad Munder Zikri, turned 9 years old in captivity yesterday. French President Emmanuel Macron became the latest world leader to visit Israel in a show of solidarity. Macron arrived in Tel Aviv on Tuesday and met with Israeli-French nationals who lost loved ones as well as families of hostages. He also met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli President Isaac Herzog.
What happened 7th of October is an awful terrorist attack against your people, your nation, its rights. And it was an immense shock for the whole planet, especially in France. I'm here to express our solidarity today and tomorrow.
Earlier, Israeli officials showed journalists terrorist body cam footage of the initial Hamas invasion. Most of the material was not for publication, but officials said it was to combat a Holocaust denial-like phenomenon that is appearing in the media. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi told the nation that they are working together as an iron fist to eliminate Hamas.
I want the citizens of Israel to know something else. We make decisions here and in the War Cabinet unanimously. We do so with great responsibility. We do so with deep awareness. We're fighting together and we will win together, only together.
Israel's military buildup continues along the Gaza border. The IDF said on Tuesday it struck more than 400 terror targets in Gaza in the last day, killing Hamas commanders and operatives who were preparing attacks. This amid reports that the U.S. is urging Israel not to start a ground war in Gaza until it can get more resources on the ground to deter a wider war and to allow time to get more hostages released. White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said the U.S. is not trying to dictate to Israel.
It's our view that the Israeli Defense Forces, Steve, need to decide for themselves how they're going to conduct operations. We're not in the business of dictating terms to them.
Meanwhile, in the north, Israel continued striking Hezbollah targets in response to rocket and anti-tank missile launches from Lebanese territory. Michael Oren is a historian and the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. He joined Gordon Robertson on the 700 Club to discuss Gaza and the history of Hamas in Gaza. Here's an excerpt.
Historically, Gaza was a breadbasket. It was a fertile, flourishing part of this area of the world, of the land of Israel. It once had a very flourishing Jewish community. You'd be surprised at how many ancient ruins, including ancient synagogues, we found in Gaza. During the Turkish period, it was under Turkish control. The British kicked the Turks out in 1917. The British were there. And when the UN partitioned the land of Israel into two states, an Arab and Jewish state in 1947. Gaza was supposed to be part of the Arab state, but the Egyptian army occupied it until June 1967, when the Israelis threw the Egyptians out, and Israel became the de facto sovereign in Gaza as a military occupier. And it was during that period when Israel established settlements there. 21 settlements with 8,000 Israeli Jews lived there, but resistance from Hamas, which was founded about 20 years ago, and increasingly led to many deaths of Israeli civilians and soldiers alike, so that in 2005, Israel decided to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. And I was there. It was very traumatic. We ripped up those 21 settlements. We destroyed them. We moved those 8,000 Jews out, and we gave the Palestinians a chance to have an independent state and live peacefully with us. And what the Palestinians did was turn it into a terrorist state under Hamas. Hamas threw out those Palestinians who were in favor of peace with us. They actually killed them. They threw them off the top of roofs. And since then, we've been in a war with Gaza. Thousands upon thousands of rockets fired, suicide bombings, pretty much you name it. Hamas has been involved in the deaths of well over now 2,500 Israelis. During about the year, I'm not in the government now, Gordon, I should specify, but when I was in the government, I was in charge of Gaza for a period. And I will tell you that everything you know about human decency, about civilization, when it comes to Hamas and Gaza, throw it out the window. This is an organization that is not only capable of the horrors which we saw committed on our people, they've oppressed their own people. They use and lose hundreds of Palestinian children every year digging their tunnels. They don't care. Tunnels collapse, hundreds of kids are killed. They don't care.
In your article, you talk about a politician who was running, and she said, when my sons killed themselves in attacking Israelis, it was the happiest day of my life. Does this ideology just overwhelm everything, that you're willing to sacrifice even your children?
Well, you got to keep in mind, the people of Gaza voted Hamas in. They are enthusiastic supporters of Hamas, as are the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. You know, the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, is in the 18th year of his 4-year term because he won't stand for re-election because he knows Hamas would win. And yes, we've had cases, we open our hospitals to the sick of Gaza. Believe it or not, we've actually cared for the children of some of the leaders of Hamas. And we had a case several years ago where a young Palestinian boy needed severe, significant heart surgery. The surgeons in Israel saved his life. And when they asked the mother, how could she say thank you? What future did she want for her son? She says, I only hope that someday he grows out to be a martyr, i.e. that he blows himself up killing Jews. This is a radically different universe. It's very difficult for us who are part of a different civilization to understand this universe.
Let's talk about politics now. I think Hamas was trying to derail the Abraham Accords. Is that now completely off the table? Is there any hope for for peace at this point in time?
Well, the Abraham Accords is a treaty between Israel and 4 Arab countries: the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, and those accords are holding. They're strained. I think what Iran was about, Iran being the principal funder and trainer of Hamas and the owner of Palestine Islamic Jihad, they wanted to block the pending treaty between Israel and Saudi Arabia. The Iranians were very much afraid of a joint Saudi-Israeli front. They were afraid of Saudi Arabia getting nuclear power, and they were willing to do everything possible to block it, and I think they have for the time being. A lot will depend on whether Israel can restore its deterrence power, whether Israel can restore its prestige in the Middle East. Many of these countries signed these accords because we were perceived as the one country in the Middle East that was standing up both to Sunni extremism in the form of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and Shiite extremism in the form of Iran and Hezbollah. And right now we have to prove that again, so that these countries will see that even though their populations may be very critical of Israel, it's in their strategic economic interest to have peace with us. So we're going to have to prove that.
Well, you just wrote an article arguing Israel should turn from attacking Hamas and launch a preemptive strike against Hezbollah. In the history of warfare, getting into two fronts, particularly a front that could include urban warfare, is not particularly a good idea. Why are you recommending that course of action?
Because Hamas is trapped. Hamas can't go anywhere. and we can continue to hit Hamas from the air, sea, ground for as long as we want. It will. Hezbollah represents a threat that's about 15 times that of Hamas. Hamas maybe has 10,000 rockets, maybe 15. Hezbollah has 150,000 rockets. They are longer range, they are bigger payloads, and many of them are very accurate. They can hit our strategic sites. Hezbollah has a terrorist force which has been massacring hundreds of thousands of Syrians for the last 10 years. They're well trained, and they are possibly, to conceive, even more vicious than Hamas. And Hezbollah has infinite supply lines. It has no problem with space. It's not Hamas. So that threat is always going to be with us. That's the sword of Damocles over our heads, which no state, including the United States, would ever put up with. You remember, maybe older, I can't see you, but I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. And President Kennedy was willing to go to global nuclear war to get Russian missiles out of Cuba. You think maybe Israel should do something to get up 150,000 lethal rockets out of the hands of Hezbollah, which is right across our border? No, we're going to have to deal with it eventually. And by the way, there's a very good chance that once Israel invades Gaza, puts its ground forces in Gaza, a week into the war, when our forces are tired and low on ammo, that's when Hezbollah is going to strike. So the question is, who strikes the first blow? Should we strike preemptively and gain the advantage, or should we accept that first blow from Hezbollah, which could be very, very devastating?
Well, we stand with you, and we pray that you stand strong. This is a time for all of us to be strong and courageous. The same instructions to Joshua. Let us be strong and courageous. Let's not be afraid, and certainly let's not be dismayed. It's time for people of good faith to stand together, and we stand with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you.
All right.
Be well.
Ambassador Oren, thanks for joining with us.
Coming up, Israel's war to eradicate Hamas will likely ripple across the global economy. How it will affect your pocketbooks when we come back. Any expanded war between Israel and Hamas would likely have far-reaching implications beyond the Middle East. Gary Lane brings us this look at the potential impact on global markets, oil, and consumer pocketbooks.
As a major player in the global economy, the United States is not immune to the economic ripples caused by geopolitical conflicts. The stock market has already experienced fluctuations as investors react to uncertainty surrounding the Israel-Hamas war. Of primary concern is the global oil market. As fighting escalates, there could be supply disruptions, followed by a spike in oil prices. Brandon Pizzurro is the incoming president of Guidestone Funds, America's largest faith-based mutual fund company. He believes consumers may experience higher gasoline prices in the days ahead.
When you have one of these, tremendous, shock events, as you might call them, is people need to initially first digest that. And that first playthrough, that bleed through, is initially going to be into the oil prices. And that's where people are initially going to feel that pain. And one of those first things that people think about when they say, is my cost of living going up? And pain at the pump is certainly something we're going to have to grapple with for a little bit of time here.
Any direct Iranian intervention could lead to blockades and supply bottlenecks in the oil-rich Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz. Less oil availability would directly affect transportation and production, potentially leading to increased prices for goods and services. In turn, a likely jump in inflation could hamper consumer purchasing power.
Wars in general are inflationary, which really starts to kind of go against this disinflationary environment that the Fed and other global central banks are looking for. So you see that inflation rise because the cost of production. Oil certainly is an inflationary measure.
Wall Street investors nervously watching Middle East developments found a bright spot. Defense-related stock prices climbed after the Pentagon pledged to send advanced weapons to Israel. The bottom line, what happens in Gaza doesn't stay in Gaza. The war is a complex web that extends elsewhere. The United States, with its interconnected economy, is not immune to the repercussions. And with a ground war now almost certain, global markets are likely to remain volatile. Pizzurro urges people not to panic and instead respond with prayer.
Any time of distress like this, the only way to turn is to God and to think about what is at play. God, of course, knows exactly what's at play, and it's for us to rely on Him and put our faith in the Lord. And the Lord also calls us to be bold and brave in our faith and standing pat with those who we ally ourselves with. So praying for Israel, praying for the people, praying for a peaceful resolution is certainly what we need to do, but not being fearful.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Up next, see how Americans are providing a place to stay and so much more to Israelis who have lost everything. As painful as the war with Hamas is, it's leading to people to come together and be resourceful. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us this story about one Israeli's idea to help those evacuated from their homes.
Avi Goldberg owns City of Gold Property Management. When war broke out, he had what he called a crazy idea.
We have many rentals and vacant apartments where owners just come themselves and use them every so often. And we sent an email to our owners about the opportunity to give their homes to people down south who really needed it, who haven't been out of the bomb shelter in weeks. And many of them jumped at the opportunity.
This initiative includes Americans who are giving their luxury vacation apartments in Jerusalem free of charge to Israelis who are forced to flee the fighting and rocket attacks in southern Israel.
These are people's homes. They don't give it to anyone. And here, they're giving it to random people they've never met before.
He quickly realized evacuees needed more than just a place to stay.
Our first family was about to arrive. Some owner generously gave his apartment over. And I spoke to my wife, and she's like, oh, they have little kids. Maybe we'll bring them some toys. And she calls me after she meets them, and she says, Avi, it's not toys we're talking here. They have nothing. They came with the clothing on their backs. They don't have socks. They don't have clothing. They don't have food. They have nothing.
Goldberg named the project after Nathaniel Young, a 20-year-old soldier killed defending his base.
Nathaniel was my dear brother. He moved to Israel about 2 years ago. Sadly, he was killed on the 7th of October when the war started, when terrorists infiltrated Israel from Gaza.
While observing the Jewish week of mourning for Nathaniel, Elliot Young and family received so many gifts they wanted to share them.
A lot of amazing people, different organizations, people I knew, people I didn't, brought me different packages of food and things, and we just had so much that we didn't need it. We heard about this, and I just brought a box of stuff today, and at the same time, other people are just bringing things.
100 volunteers are helping in this project. So far, they've housed more than 250 people, many of them from Netivot, where terrorists hijacked a police car and drove through the streets.
The children were in the house all the time for a week and a half, full of fear, not only afraid of terrorists. Every time we heard shooting, we didn't know who it was. The fear was also from the rocket attacks. Underneath the house where we lived, there was a rocket that the IDF blew up. But just to hear this, it was like being on the battlefield.
Israel Haddad received an offer to stay in a Jerusalem apartment. It took 2 days to decide it was safe enough to travel with his wife and 3 children.
We couldn't believe at first that we arrived at an apartment that there are people like this. They gave us a home. There are no words to even thank these people.
Young's message to the world:
look for the truth and protect the Jews in your country.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Still ahead, the survivors of Hamas' brutal massacre are facing unimaginable trauma, especially for the children. See how CBN Israel is bringing help and hope to Israeli families. Entire families have been brutally slaughtered en masse in Jewish communities, and many Israeli children are grappling with severe trauma. See how CBN Israel is helping them cope.
The trauma experienced by Israeli families and children is almost unimaginable after the attack by Hamas has killed more than 1,400 Israeli soldiers and civilians.
The infiltrations on this scale and the amount of destruction and inhumane deeds done, no one in this community has been unscathed.
Hardest hit were families along the Gaza border in southern Israel, where homes and neighborhoods were leveled. You can see the trauma this family faced when they were recently rescued. CBN Israel has been helping by transporting and paying for families to stay at hotels far from the border. Carrie Lee, who runs a nonprofit and is now a victim herself, has been a longtime partner of CBN Israel.
Which is an incredible organization that is not just with us, the day before the war or the day after. They've been with us on a long journey.
In addition to lodging, CBN Israel went shopping and brought toys and coloring books and crayons to give kids something to do during their time in hotel rooms and lobbies.
We're making sure that the families are safe and taken care of with the basic necessities. We're also speaking to the parents about ways to help their kids process the trauma. We're bringing them counseling and simply spending time with them.
They've been providing our children with therapies, with group therapies, individual therapies.
A swim at a pool in one of the hotels brings a smile to the face of this boy and his father. Children play with toys, puzzles, and games provided by CBN Israel. Other children draw pictures, a good way to express emotions they barely know how to process.
We're just praying that we will continue to get help from amazing friends of Israel abroad so that we can continue to have a place to stay.
Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. And please continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and the situation here in Israel. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.